They say better late than never. Okay. So we're coming from Parshas Shkolim, and we're moving towards Parshas Zacher. In fact, this is the only kviyas where Parshas Shkolim and Parshas Zacher come one right after the other. Normally there's a hafsaka, there's an interruption between the two. But because Parshas Shkolim came the latest possible that it could, it was on Rosh Chodesh. Normally it's the Shabbos before Rosh Chodesh. This year it was on Rosh Chodesh. And Parshas Zacher comes the earliest that it could possibly come. Because Parshas Zacher is the Shabbos before Purim. So when Purim is Friday, it brings Parshas Zacher as far from Purim as it can possibly be. So therefore, this year there's no interruption between Shkolim and Zacher. So we move straight on to talking about Parshas Zacher. So Parshas Zacher is always read, it's the portion about remembering what Amalek did to us on our way out of Mitzrayim. And it's always read on the Shabbos before Purim. The connection of Parshas Zacher to Purim is a very, very simple one. And that is that Haman was a descendant of Amalek. And being that Haman was a descendant of Amalek, so it's very appropriate that we have a mitzvah in the Torah to remember what Amalek did to us. So it's going to be 1 week in the year when it's going to be instituted to read Parshas Zacher, to remember what Amalek did to us. So it's the most appropriate time to do so is the Shabbos before Purim, being that Haman was from Amalek. So the story of Purim is another interaction between Amalek and the Jewish people. But then we also have the Haftarah of Parshas Shkolim. Not Parshas Zacher, excuse me. The Haftarah of Parshas Zacher is the story of Shaul HaMelech, who was instructed through the prophet Shmuel by the word of Hashem to go and destroy Amalek. And he carried out most of the instruction, but with a little bit of compromise. And Shmuel goes to greet him when Shaul comes back from the battle. And Shaul says, Hakimaisi is Dvar Hashem. I have fulfilled the word of Hashem. And Shmuel says, you haven't fulfilled the word of Hashem. Mo'asta is Dvar Hashem. You have despised the word of Hashem. And Shmuel says to Shaul, what is the sound of all these sheep that I hear? And Shaul says that the people, the nation that had compassion on the sheep of Amalek, and they wanted to bring them back to Eretz Yisrael to offer them as sacrifices. That's why we have all the sheep here. We're bringing them back as sacrifices. So Shmuel says to Shaul, Shmaya mizevach toiv. Listening is better than sacrifice. Lahakshiv, to obey, mechelav elim, is better than the fat of ram. And Shmuel tells Shaul that you have despised the word of Hashem, and Hashem has despised you for being king over Israel. And Shmuel rents his garments and says to Shaul, Kara Hashem es mamluchos Yisrael me'alecha. Hashem has torn off the kingship of Israel from upon you and has given it to your neighbor who is better than you. And that's where David HaMelech was anointed to become the king in the place of Shaul. So the fact that we read this Haftarah on the Shabbos before Purim, or Shabbos Parshas Zacher, is quite understandable because at the end of the day, Haman, besides the fact that he stems from Amalek in general, more specifically, he stems from Agag. Haman ben Hamdasa ha'Agagi. Agag was the king of Amalek, who Shaul spared. And even though Shmuel killed Agag in the end of the story, but in between the time that Shaul should have killed him and Shmuel actually killed him, in between, okay, in between, we're all Melamed Schus that you all got stuck in a traffic jam, and we were told there's a traffic jam on Golden Green Road. So in between the time that Shaul that was meant to kill Agag and the time that Shmuel actually killed Agag, in between he fathered a child, and that child was the ancestor of Haman. So there's a direct connection between the fact that Shaul did not obey the word of Hashem in the story of the Haftarah of this week, is directly connected with the outcome, and that is that Haman, terrible anti-Semite, who brought about the decree Lahashmid La'arig La'avidus Kol HaYehudim, to destroy and annihilate and kill every single Jew, men, women, and children, was a direct result of what we read about in Haftarah, that Shaul did not obey the word of Hashem. However, there's more in the Haftarah than just telling us that Shaul didn't obey the word of Hashem. There's also the whole dialogue between Shmuel and Shaul. And since everything in the Torah is exact, there must be a significance in the dialogue that takes place between Shmuel and Shaul. It's also connected to the story of Purim. So in order to understand this, we have to start with asking a simple question. And that is, Shaul was a great man. After all, he was chosen by Hashem to be the king over Israel. You don't just choose anybody. So he was the most appropriate man for the job. And the pasuk says, "Ben shana Shaul b'molcha," which is a difficult pasuk to understand. It's generally understood that he was 1 year into his reign at the time when this happened. But our Chachamim say, "Ben shana Shaul b'molcha" literally means Shaul was 1 year old when he became king. How can you become 1 year old when you become king? So it means that he was clean from sin like a child of 1 year old. So imagine to say that about a human being, an adult. Thank you very much. And he was clean from sin like a child of 1 year old is an incredible thing, a statement to make about a person. So obviously we're dealing here with a very special individual. Shaul wasn't just anybody. He was a very special individual. So how did he make such an extreme mistake of despising the word of Hashem as described by Shmuel Hanavi? And the answer is that Shaul was brilliant. He was a very, very brilliant, wise man, and he understood great depth in Torah and in the understanding the will of Hashem. And he understood that a carbon is a very, very lofty concept. As the Zohar says, Raza the Korbana, Eilad Raza the Ein Sof, that the mystery of a carbon rises until the mystery of the Ein Sof. So a carbon has a very strong impact in all the highest worlds. Now, the idea of a carbon is you take an animal that represents the animal soul within the human being, which is chayshech, darkness, and you elevate it to Hashem, and you transform darkness into light. And we know that when darkness is transformed into light, it creates the greatest light. So when you take the animal and you transform it into, you elevate it to godliness, you're creating an incredible light. Especially if the chayshech isn't just regular chayshech. Amalek is considered the ultimate darkness. So if you take the animals of Amalek and you bring them to the Mishkan to make them into karbanos, according to Seichel of Kedusha, that would be the most phenomenal thing in the world. So Shaul's wisdom led him to believe that he was doing an incredibly great thing by bringing these animals as karbanos. He got one thing wrong, and that is that the instruction here, very clearly given over to him by Shmuel Hanavi from Hashem, was to destroy Amalek and to destroy everything that belongs to Amalek. Nothing should remain. So with all his chachma, at the end of the day, he was missing the main component, which is Kabbalas El Malchus Shamayim, acceptance of the yoke of heaven. And this is what Shmuel said to Shaul, Shmaya mizevach toiv. Listening is better than sacrifices. As great as sacrifices are, it doesn't compare to actually listening to what you're told. Lahakshiv, to obey, mechelev elim, is better and preferable than the fat of rams. Now, what is meant by the fat of rams? There's an apostle called chelev lashem. All the fattest you should be given to Hashem, which means the best, the most sophisticated faculties to be used in the service of Hashem. As we discussed in a shiur a few weeks ago, it's not enough to serve Hashem with our hands and feet. He wants us to serve Him with our most sophisticated components, which are our intellect and our emotion, our most sophisticated faculties. So it's not enough just nasa. It needs to be nasa v'nishma. We also have to understand. Hashem wants us to serve Him with our understanding. However, that's only when it doesn't contradict Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shamayim, acceptance of the yoke of heaven. That's the greatest thing. That is the root and the source and the basic foundation of all of Yiddishkeit. The Zohar says about Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shamayim, Da Tara La'Allah. This is the gate through which to enter. All areas of Yiddishkeit, the gate with which to enter is Kabbalas El Malchus Shamayim, acceptance of the yoke of heavenly kingship. The first thing first, you have to accept what Hashem tells you. Hashem's authority is the most important thing. If you don't accept Hashem's authority, you're missing the foundation. If you're missing the foundation, the building can't be worth much. There's a sorry. Do you want to ask something?
Yeah, so why do you need a God?
Okay, so that's a separate issue. Why did he leave Agag? So it says that he felt sorry for Agag, I guess, as in his role as a king. He understood that the king is responsible for the nation. And Agag probably he felt was responsible for his nation, and he had to do what he had to do. So he felt sorry for him. It's not explained in this explanation, but it's a very good question. And at the end of the day, that was a major fault. Yes.
Can you not argue that Hashem wanted something to happen, it would happen? So even though Shotwell was the vehicle for it, if Hashem didn't want someone to exist, then he wouldn't exist.
Okay, so it's a very good question you're asking. The question is, if Hashem wants something to happen, it's going to happen. So the fact that Shaul did not destroy Agag is because Hashem wanted Haman to eventually exist. So you have to differentiate between, at the time that something is done, at that point there's free choice to obey Hashem's instructions, and the better we carry out our free choice correctly, the better off we are, and the better off the future of Klal Yisrael will be. And then there's, once it's done, then we know that retroactively, if it's done, ultimately this is the way Hashem wanted it, and in the long run it's going to bring to something better. But at the time that it's done, you have to do the right thing. And if you don't do the right thing, you're causing a lot of trouble.
He wasn't punished because of that. He was punished by doing the converts, no?
I believe he was punished because of both. But the conversation that goes on in the Haftarah between Shaul and Shmuel is about this, the subject of Shmoya Mizevach, Hakshiv Mechelef. Obedience rather than sacrifices. Obedience rather than the choicest of the faculties of the soul. So the reminds me of a story that there was a Professor Yitzchak Block, was an interesting individual. He was a Baal Tshuva. He got involved in Yiddishkeit when he was in university. He learned in yeshiva, and the Rebbe told him to go back to university and to become a professor. And in his role as a professor, he'll be able to do more for Yiddishkeit than he stays in yeshiva. And eventually he went back and he became professor in Greek mythology in the University of London, Ontario. And in his role as a professor of Greek mythology in the University of London, Ontario, he had a very strong hashpah on a lot of Yiddish students and made a lot of Baalei Tshuva. He was a very Achsidish Yid b'tachlis, long beard, and chassid, a real chassid, and he was a professor of Greek mythology in London, Ontario. So he came to England a number of occasions. On one occasion, I remember him coming. I invited him to yeshiva to speak to the Bachrim. Very inspirational individual. But the story that I'm going to tell happened many years earlier. He was much younger, and he came here to England, and he was invited to Cambridge to have a farbrengen with the Jewish students in Cambridge. And Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Olav Shalom, was a student in Cambridge. We're going back a long time. And he was present at the Malava Malka. It was a Malava Malka farbrengen. And he needed to come back to London for some reason. He had an appointment, I don't know what it was. So he was given the task of accompanying Professor Block on the train, midnight train from Cambridge back to London. Now, Professor Block was sitting by the farbrengen, and he was getting very involved. And then Jonathan Sachs saw it was getting late. It was about 11:45 already. And he said to him, Professor Block, we have to catch a train in 15 minutes, time to go. And he said, don't worry about it. He was into what he was doing. And then finally, about 7 minutes to 12, he turns to me and says, we have a train to catch at 12 o'clock, right? We better go. It was a bit too late to catch the train. Anyway, they got to the station, and the train was delayed. In those days in England, everything worked exactly. So it was very unique that the train was delayed. They had to wait another few minutes on the platform. So Professor Block was still going strong with his, and he must have had a few l'chaims at the farbrengen. Anyway, he did a headstand in the station in Cambridge. Jonathan Sachs wanted to find a hole that should bury him somewhere. Anyway, and he said, I'm doing this headstand dafka in the train station in Cambridge because Cambridge is a place where they worship the mind. And I want people to know that the mind, the head, is not the most important thing. The most important thing are the feet. To be a foot soldier, to do what you're meant to do. That's where it's at. The head is that's second rate. The most important thing are the feet. Kabbalah sel machal shamayim, which is basically this concept of shmoya mizevach toiv lahakshiv mechei levelu. Obedience, Kabbalah sel machal shamayim, accept Hashem's authority at the end of the day is the most important thing. And that is the underpinning foundation of all of Yiddishkeit. And that's why when Shaul messed up on Kabbalah Sel Machal Shamayim, it brought about a Haman who made a decree lahashmid larigul abedus kol Yehudim to undermine the whole of Yiddishkeit. Because when you're lacking the foundation, which is Kabbalah Sel, the whole of Yiddishkeit comes toppling down. And how was it corrected? How was Shaul's mistake corrected? It was corrected by the Jewish people's behavior in the story of Purim. What's the behavior of the Jewish people in the story of Purim that was so clearly a correction for this mistake? So one of the parts of the story of Purim, which is not emphasized so much, is that after Haman was hung, which is a miracle in itself, right? Tremendous miracle. Esther came before Achashverosh, and Achashverosh stuck out a scepter, and he agreed to come to the party, and he agreed to come to a second party, and then Esther took the opportunity to say to Achashverosh, what would you, when he asked her, what did you like up to half the kingdom? I'll give you. And Esther said, I just want to save my own life and the life of my nation, because there's someone terrible that wants to destroy me and my nation. And Achashverosh says to her, who is this person that even considers such a thing? And she says, this terrible Haman, right, sitting right over here, he's the man. And then Chargoina comes along just at the right timing and says, there's a gallows that Haman built for Mordechai who saved the king's life. And the king says, hang him on those gallows. And immediately they hung Haman, and everything turns around. Yeah. However, one of the things that we perhaps don't focus on enough is there was a major problem. The major problem was there was a royal edict signed and put into effect to destroy, annihilate, and kill every single Jew in 127 lands of Achashverosh. And nothing was done about that. So the Megillah continues and says that Esther came before Achashverosh, and she fell before his feet, and she cried, and she pleaded to remove this terrible decree of Haman the Agagite, who issued against the Jewish people that they should be annihilated. So Achashverosh says to Esther, my dear Esther, I'm very sorry. There's nothing I can do to help. A script which is written in the script of the king and signed with the seal of the king cannot be rescinded. But out of the goodness of my heart, I'll tell you what I'll do for you. I'll issue another edict that will allow the Jewish people the right of self-defense. Which means that initially the situation was such that when Haman's decree was issued, so the Amalekim, the anti-Semites, had the green light to come and destroy Yidden, and kill, annihilate, and destroy the entire Jewish people, men, women, and children in one day. And the Jewish people were not allowed to defend themselves because they were coming by the law, by the rule of law. Yeah, the policeman comes to your house to arrest you, you're not allowed to defend yourself. It's coming by the rule of law. And here, Achashverosh, in the kindness and goodness of his heart, issued a decree that when it comes the 13th of Adar and all the anti-Semites come with their knives and their hatchets and they come to kill the Yidden, he said, no, you have a right to defend yourself. Okay? In the law is giving you the right to defend yourself. So this happened in the month of Nisan. So there were 11 months in which the future was very doubtful what was going to happen over here. Because for 11 months, from Nisan till Adar, nobody knew what was going to be. The anti-Semites had a green light to destroy, kill, annihilate every single Jew, man, woman, and children in one day. The Jewish people had the right to defend themselves. What's going to be the outcome? It's very, very unclear. So every single Jew was in a situation where he knew that his life and the life of his family were hanging on a shoestring. What's going to be over here? And there were, according to the Alter Rebbe in Torah there was a soft option how the Jewish people had an ability to save themselves. And that is that the decree was only against Yehudim, against the Jewish people. So anyone who would say, I'm no longer a Yehudi, I no longer belong to this nation, I no longer accept this religion. From now on, I'm a Frenchman, I'm an Italian, I'm a Scotsman, I'm an Irishman, not a Yehudi. Then he would be spared. He and his family would be spared. What happened, in fact? Thousands and thousands of Yidden throughout 127 lands of Achashverosh. How many took that soft option? Not a single one. Mordechai HaTzadik inspired the entire generation that Yidden should have absolute Mesiras Nefesh, l'mayla mitam v'das, in a way which is totally super rational. And every single Yid stood on Mesiras Nefesh and was ready to put himself and his family in the danger of being killed rather than renounce his Yiddishkeit. So that was a Mesiras Nefesh, L'mayla Mitam B'das, and that undid the damage that was done by Shaul by following reason. Their super irrational Mesiras Nefesh undid the damage that was done by Shaul by following reason. Sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Shaul came from Benjamin.
Shaul came from Benjamin, and Mordechai was a descendant of Shaul. Yes, yes. Therefore, this was a tikkun for Shaul's mistake. Yeah.
How does that work? That's a come, sorry.
Because
He wasn't-
Shaul's mistake was that he followed reason
Yeah.
rather than super rational devotion to the will of Hashem. Right? Even if it makes more sense to bring karbanis, if Hashem says you have to destroy Amalek completely, you have to destroy Amalek completely. Don't ask what makes sense. Obeying is greater than sacrifices. The hakshiv to follow orders is greater than the fats of rams. And Shaul missed that. So that brought about, as I said before, that since Kabbalah Sel Malchus Shamayim, acceptance of the yoke of heavenly kingship is the foundation, is the underpinning foundation of all of Yiddishkeit. So as a result of Shaul's mistake, there became a decree, Lahashmid, Lahar Gulabid, as Kol Yehudim, the entire Yiddishkeit should be on the Shalom would go down the drain. And the way it was corrected was with Mordechai inspired Klal Yisrael to a level of Mesiras Nefesh in a way which was totally super irrational. So the super irrational undid the mistake of following reason. How do we celebrate this miracle? We also celebrate this miracle in a similar way. There's 4 mitzvahs on Purim. And out of the 4 mitzvahs on Purim, the first that is mentioned in the Megillah, and the one that encompasses the entire day of Purim, because the Megillah reading, you read the Megillah once at night, once in the day, and you've fulfilled your mitzvah. Done. You've shalach manis to one friend, two items of food to one friend. You've done your mitzvah. You give more if you want, but you've done your mitzvah. You give 2 gifts to 2 poor people. You've done the mitzvah of Matanas Lav Yair. There's one mitzvah that encompasses the entire day of Purim, and that is the Megillah says that these days of Purim should be Yemei Mishteh V'Simcha, days of feasting and rejoicing. So even though we're Yotze this mitzvah by Sudas Purim, but essentially the mitzvah encompasses the entire day of Purim. There's an obligation of Mishteh V'Simcha. So how do we fulfill the mitzvah of Mishteh V'Simcha? Gemara says, Chayiv inish l'psumim l'purya ad lo yada bein arer haman l'barach Mordechai. A person is obligated to celebrate on Purim until he doesn't know to distinguish between cursed be Haman and blessed be Mordechai. So what's the idea of not knowing? There is a relationship with Yiddishkeit that's based on knowledge, based on understanding. As much as I understand, that's how much I'm committing myself to. I'm going to follow my reason. I'm going to follow my understanding. Purim is chayiv inish l'psuma b'purya ada lo yada. He has to reach the level where he's above understanding. And bein arer Haman, both when it comes to the aspect of Yiddishkeit, which says cursed be Haman. In other words, there are certain things that Yiddishkeit says are objectionable. There's 365 negative mitzvahs, which the Torah says these things you cannot do. So whether you do understand or you don't understand, whether it makes sense to you, it doesn't make sense to you, you're comfortable with it, you're not comfortable with it. If the Torah says it's objectionable, the Torah says arer Haman, it's arer Haman. Ada lo yada, beyond understanding. Ubein Baruch Mordechai, as well as in blessed be Mordechai. Blessed be Mordechai is a 248 positive mitzvahs, which the Torah says this is the right thing, this is what you should be doing, whether you do understand or you don't understand, whether it makes sense to you or doesn't make sense to you, whether you're comfortable with it or you're not comfortable with it. It's the will of Hashem, you go for it all the way. Higher than understanding. Ada lo yada. So the celebration of Purim is also constructed in such a manner that it's a tikkun, a correction for the mistake of Shaul who followed reason. So you can ask first. Nobody's running away.
Right. Amalek was an idol worship. How do we know that these sheep that Shaul wanted to bring to,
They bring us karbanos, how do we know they weren't used as idol worship?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question, let me repeat for the people that are watching on the Zoom. The question was that Shaul wanted to bring the animals of Amalek as karbanos. But isn't there a problem with bringing animals that might have been used for idol worship? So I believe that halachically the answer to that would be that only an object which is used by a Jew for idol worship is not acceptable for a korban. An animal which is used by Gentiles idol worship, I don't think has it. But the main issue over here was not the fact that it was used for idol worship, but the fact that it was against the will of Hashem. Hashem clearly said, you have to destroy everything that belongs to them. There should be no trace left of Amalek. And by bringing the animals as a carbon, the will of Hashem was being defied. And that is the most important component over here. You don't defy the will of Hashem, whether you understand it or you don't understand it. You have all the explanations. You can write a 25-page essay in explaining why this is the right thing. If Hashem says it's the wrong thing, it's the wrong thing. It has to be adoloyada, beyond understanding.
Wasn't it the chesed that saved them as well? Because they did so much chesed towards each other.
There are various explanations in various midrashim, but the theme of what we're discussing right now, this is the focus. Yes, I'm sorry, you wanted to ask something.
The Tetzaveh happened on
Chedesh Nisan was the Gzeira was set out on Chedesh Nisan. Vayaver Mordechai arranged the 3-day fast. Was Erev Pesach and Yud Gimel Yud Aleph Tezvav according to.
So they had to wait until the next Purim.
Till the next Adar, until they saw the results. So Haman was hung immediately, and the general mood in the direction of that the Jewish people were seen to be victorious is established immediately. But the technical problem of how you're going to save the Yidden against those people that want to take advantage of the legal edict that was set out to murder all the Jews, they needed to be solved. And Achashverosh was the maximum that he was prepared to do was to issue an edict that the Jewish people had the right of self-defense. He wasn't prepared to do any more than that. That's why, actually, on the 13th of Adar, when it finally came, the whole Jewish Nikalu Yehudim Ba'areim, all the Jewish people of the Megillah says gathered in their cities, and to defend themselves and to take and to reach and to attack those who were trying to attack them. And the miracle is that they were successful. They fended off the attacks and they killed many of their enemies. The whole story of Shushan Purim was that Esther came before Achashverosh and said that we were successful in killing so many of the enemies of the Jewish people in Shushan on the first day, on the 13th of Adar, but we didn't finish the job, and we're still in a danger for the future. So give us another day to finish the job. And that's since the people of Shushan fought the battle for 2 days, they only rested on the 15th. That's why in Shushan we celebrate Purim on the 15th, which for us, on a practical purpose, on a practical level, it means that the cities that have walls around them from the days of Yeshua Binun, like Yerushalayim, celebrates Purim on the 15th, which this year is very, very interesting because the 15th of Adar is on a Shabbos this year. Now, Shabbos, when Purim falls on Shabbos, which we don't have such a thing as Purim falling on Shabbos. Closest we get to is Purim falling on Friday, like we do this year. But in Yerushalayim, on a year when we have Purim on Friday, in Yerushalayim they have Purim on Shabbos. And Purim on Shabbos is very interesting because the 4 mitzvahs of Purim, each one for a different reason cannot be fulfilled on Shabbos. The Megillah cannot be read on Shabbos for the same reason that we don't blow shofar on Shabbos because you might come to carry it. Then Atanis Lav Yonim has to be given you couldn't be given on Shabbos anyway. You can't give money on Shabbos. Sudas Purim is a problem on Shabbos because it says Lasois Oisam Yemei Nishta V'Simcha, to make them into days of feasting and rejoicing. Shabbos you anyway feast and rejoice, so that's not making it into a day of feasting and rejoicing. So what do you do with those mitzvahs? So the halacha is that the Purim stretches out for 3 days. The Megillah is read Thursday night and Friday morning in Yerushalayim. Purim and the day that the Megillah is read is when the Matanos Lav Yanim is given, because the poor people are looking forward to the reading of the Megillah. They know when the Megillah is read, they rake it in. So we don't keep them waiting. We give them Matanos Lav Yanim on the same day that the Megillah is read, even though it's not yet Purim. And then Shabbos is actually Purim, although you don't do any of the mitzvahs of Purim on Shabbos. But you say Al Anisim, and you take out 2 Sifrei Torah, and you read the Vayavei Amalek, which we normally read on Purim, is read on Shabbos. And it's interesting that the Haftarah that we spoke about, Bakadati, which we read this Shabbos Parshas Zocher, is coming Shabbos. In Yerushalayim, they're going to read the same Haftarah 2 weeks consecutively, because they're going to read it once for Parshas Zocher, and a second time they're going to read it because in Purim you read Vayavei Amalek, which also talks about the fight with the war with Amalek. Actually talks about the event of the war with Amalek. Parshas Zocher talks about the mitzvah of remembering what Amalek did, and the mitzvah of you should wipe out the memory of Amalek and not forget. But the story of Amalek coming and attacking the Jewish people is read on Purim. So in Yerushalayim, it's read in the second Sefer Torah next Shabbos, not this coming Shabbos, the week after, Shushan Purim. And the Haftarah is again Pakadati. Same Haftarah that we're going to read this week, they read again next week. For us, it's Shushan Purim. It's not Purim anymore. So we only have one Sefer Torah, and we read the regular Haftarah, Parshas Kisif. But so Shabbos is Purim, in the sense they say Al Nisim, we read an extra Sefer Torah, a special Haftarah, and it's Freilich. Yeah. It's Purim afterward. But the mitzvahs are not performed on that day. Then the Suda and Shalach Manus happens on Sunday. So they end up celebrating for 3 days. I remember one year that Rebbe suggested that we who are not celebrating Purim on Sunday, in fact, for us it's a regular day, we say Tachlim on Sunday. But still, it's a good thing to give additional Shalach Manus to be in to be in touch with what's going on in Yerushalayim. Anyway, the Rebbe should help long before Purim. Mashiach should be here, and we'll all be where we need to be, and we'll celebrate Purim exactly as we're meant to celebrate it. However, it'll be. Anyway, so coming back to. Okay, so that's now we're gonna. Unless there are any other questions on this, we'll go over to Tanya.
That's why the goal didn't start. They waited until
Yeah, that the Pashtus that came as a result of the fact that they saw that Haman was hung, and yeah, but it's 100%. Yeah. Yes. Very good. As the Sefer is saying, the Shema is Rosh Tevis El Malchus Shamayim. Everybody knows Shema. And we know that when we say the Shema Yisrael, we're accepting upon ourselves El Malchus Shamayim, the yoke of the heavenly kingship.
The whole story
Very
of
nice.
Let's take over, is it a 5-year period?
Is it
Is it 5 years? Like, how long is it?
It depends what you consider the whole story, from when Achashverosh became king, and from when he made his original pardon.
Yeah.
It's quite a few years, but the thick of the story, from when Haman made his decree until the miracle was completed, was just under a year. Because Haman's decree came out in the month of Nisan, and he threw lots, which fell in the month of Adar, so it was almost a year.
Was Moshe at the same time as Nehemiah?
Yes, they were both members of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. Okay, so we're in Tanya. We are first chapter, page Hey. Numbers on the bottom of the page, it's page 2. And we learned that when the soul comes down to this world, it's given an oath: be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha. And even if the entire world tells you that you are a tzaddik, you should still consider yourself a rasha. So the Alter Rebbe in the 4th line on the page continues, we need to understand that none of his Perek Beis, didn't we learn in a mission in the 2nd chapter of Pirkei Avos? The Alter Hirasha, b'fnei atzmacha. Don't be a rasha b'fnei atzmacha, which the Mefarshim explain means don't consider yourself a rasha. So how can you say that every neshama, when it comes down to this world, is given an oath, be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha, even if the whole world tells you you're a tzaddik, still consider yourself a rasha? When it says in Pirkei Avos explicitly, don't consider yourself a rasha. V'gam, also, a logical question. And why do you have to add a logical question if you already have a question from a Mishnah? Because in the Mishnah, there's various interpretations. The common interpretation is, as we just explained, Alti Rasha b'fnei atzmacha, don't consider yourself a rasha. However, there is other some Mefarshim give another interpretation. Alti Rasha b'fnei atzmacha means that if you're in a community and the entire community is taking on some kind of an improvement in their behavior, so you shouldn't be left out. Don't remain a rasha on your own. Join with the rest of the community. So if that's the meaning of Alti Rasha b'fnei atzmacha, it's got nothing to do with considering yourself a rasha. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe backs up the question not only with the Mishnah but also with a svara, with a rational argument. And that is v'gamim yeh be'einav kerasha. Also, if a person is going to consider himself a rasha, yeir alavave, going to make him feel very bad. V'yeh atzef, will become depressed. V'lo yuchal abed Hashem b'simcha v'tuv le'vod. He won't be able to serve Hashem with joy and gladness of heart. And we know that serving Hashem with joy and gladness of heart is very, very basic. It's a principle in Yiddishkeit that a Yid should serve Hashem with joy. In fact, the pasuk in Parshas Tetzaveh, after the 98 curses of the Teichach of Parshas Tetzaveh, it says, "Tachas asher lo yavadetas Hashem Elokecha." All these things will befall you because you didn't serve Hashem your God, b'simcha v'tuv le'vod, with joy and gladness of heart. So true, there is the simple pshat that it means you didn't serve Hashem in a time of joy and gladness of heart, and therefore v'avadetas leidecha, instead you will serve your enemies. But there are some mefarshim. The Rambam in Hilchos Sukkah v'Lulav seems to understand it this way, and the Arizal emphasizes it very strongly. That tachas hashalei avadetas Hashem elokecha b'simcha v'tuv leivav means that even if you did serve Hashem, but you didn't serve Hashem with joy, that itself is a reason for you're culpable. Because it's not enough that we serve Hashem; we also need to know how fortunate we are and how fantastic it is that we have the privilege of serving Hashem. So we need to serve Hashem with joy. And if a person is going to consider himself a rasha, it's going to be a depressing thought, and it's going to get in the way of serving Hashem with joy. So how could you recommend that a person should consider himself a rasha? I once heard a story that Moshe Feinstein, besides being a big great Rosh Hashiva and a great basic, was also a Rav in a small shul on the Lower East Side in the FDR Drive. And he was sitting once by Shalosh Shudas with his balabatim. Many of his balabatim were people that came after the war and or before, and tried to establish Torah homes in America, and tried to influence their children, and it was a big struggle. It was an uphill battle, and many of them were not successful in influencing their children to follow the right path. So once by a Shalosh Shudas in the shul, one of the people said to him, to Moshe Feinstein, he said, "Rebbe, why weren't we successful with our children?" So Moshe Feinstein said, "If you ask me, I would think that the biggest problem was the oi. That the message that our children got was, oi, it's difficult to be a yid, difficult to keep Shabbos, difficult to eat kosher, this is difficult, that is difficult." The children hear that so many times, eventually they say, you know what, if it's so difficult, leave us out of it. If the message that the children would have gotten is, what a privilege it is to be a yid, what a privilege it is to keep Shabbos, what a privilege it is to eat kosher, what a privilege it is to serve Hashem, then perhaps it would have had different results. This is Ma'aseh Shahai. Anyway, but we know that a very, very basic part of Yiddishkeit is Avadatas Hashem Elokecha b'simcha v'tuv leivav. And we have to serve Hashem with joy. Pasuk and Tehillim, Ivdus Hashem b'simcha. Serve Hashem with joy. So how can you recommend that a person should walk around with with this thing on his head, that I'm a rasha? Surely that's very depressing.
Perhaps rasha is the wrong word.
Maybe
okay, but if you look at the Gemara in Nida, which we just quoted, it says Tehi tzaddik v'alti rasha, be a tzaddik and don't be a rasha. Afilu kol ha'olam kulei emrim l'chad tzaddikat, and even if the whole world tells you are a tzaddik, heyei beinecha karasha, you should consider yourself like a rasha.
Because you can never have the perfection. You're on your learning curve, and somebody says, "Oh, well, you've arrived." It's wrong.
Okay, so we need to clarify. You're right. We need to clarify what exactly karasha means. But and the simple understanding of the word, it means karasha, like a rasha. So the question is, considering yourself like a rasha could be a very depressing experience. Now there is a solution. It would appear, and that is consider yourself a rasha, but don't let it bother you. It's okay. Now that's very dangerous, because if it's okay to be a rasha, and the next time you're faced with a temptation, you say to yourself, well, it's okay to be a rasha, so do the wrong thing. What's the difference? That's even more dangerous. So he says, if he's not going to allow it to bother him, to upset him that he's a rasha, he can come to being light about all of Yiddishkeit, not taking anything seriously. It's okay to do the wrong thing, and life continues. It should be a person that Yid has to feel that if he does the wrong thing, that's terrible, and he has to do tshuva immediately. So how do we make sense out of this shvua that you should always consider yourself karasha, like a rasha? Now the question could be asked. This question is a general question which could be asked independent of the Gemara in Nida. A simple question: what if a person did sin? What if a person made a mistake and he did sin? How should he view himself? Should he say to himself, "It's terrible"? And if he says it's terrible, then he's, God forbid, not going to be able to serve Hashem with joy because he did a terrible thing. Or should he say, "No, it's okay, just move on"? But then the next time he's tempted to sin, he'll say it was okay last time, probably okay this time too. So isn't this a general question that every person is faced with if he sins? It's not just a question because the Gemara Nida says that every person should consider himself like a Rasha. So the answer is no. If a person actually sinned, then there's a solution. The solution is he should feel very remorseful, very terrible about what he did, regret what he did, do tshuva. Now Hashem will accept his tshuva, and then he's wiped away that sin from his record, and then he can serve Hashem with joy. The problem over here is, if you read the words of the Gemara in Nida and you take them literally, that you should be a tzaddik and not be a rasha. And even if the whole world tells you that you are a tzaddik, still consider yourself a rasha. That means that even if you did everything right, you should still consider yourself like a rasha. So it's not that you can get past it and then be b'simcha. Whatever happens, you always consider yourself like a rasha. You never get past it. So then we have the problem. Either you're always going to be depressed, or you're going to become very light, it's going to become inconsequential whether you do the right thing or didn't do the right thing. None of those options are good ideas. So it comes back to, we need to get clarification of what exactly does it mean, Hayei beinecha karash. And to help us achieve this, the Alter Rebbe begins with Achaim. However, the matter is as follows. We find in the Gemara that people are divided into 5 categories. What are the 5 categories? Tzaddik v'toivle. Literally, it means that tzaddik, things are good for him. That's the simple meaning in the Gemara. Tzaddik v'rale. There's a tzaddik who things are difficult for them, having a difficult time. Rasha v'toivle. There's a rasha, a wicked person, who things are going well for them. Rasha v'rale. There's a rasha who things are going bad for them. Ubeidani. And there's the in-betweener, the intermediate, the Beinani. So we have 5 levels. Now, there isn't one place in the Gemara where all these 5 levels are mentioned at once. There's one place where it says tzaddik v'toivle, tzaddik v'rale, rasha v'toivle, rasha v'rale. And there's another place where it says tzaddik rasha beinani. So if you put together these 2 Gemaras, you come to a total of 5 categories, which it appears that every person fits into one of these 5 categories, either a tzaddik v'toivle, or a tzaddik v'rale, or a rasha v'toivle, rasha v'rale, or a beinani. Now, at first glance, there's only 3 levels. There's tzaddik, rasha, and beinani, and toivle and rale are not a level. They're telling you about his life. Are things going well for him, or are things going bad for him? However, the Gemara explains why is there a tzaddik with things going well for him, and a tzaddik with things are going difficult for him. So the Gemara says, tzaddik v'toivle, tzaddik gomer. The tzaddik, the things are going well for him, is a perfect tzaddik. Being that he's a perfect tzaddik, Hashem rewards him both in this world and the next world. Tzaddik v'ra'alei, the tzaddik, the things are going difficult for him, is a tzaddik she'ein gomer, is an imperfect tzaddik. So being that he's an imperfect tzaddik, and Hashem loves tzaddikim, so he wants to give him the best deal possible, but there's some imperfection there that needs to be atoned for. So we know that the world to come is where there's true delight. All the delight that a person could possibly experience in this world is tiny in comparison to the delight of the world to come. As the Mishnah says, Yafa shah achas shel koiras ruach le'olam haba, one moment of delight, pleasure in the world to come is preferable mikol chayei ha'olam hazeh, to all the life of this world. As the Tzemach Tzedek very beautifully and graphically explains it, he says, if a person would live 1,000 years, and he would be a king of kings and not lack anything in the world. Imagine live 1,000 years and have everything you can dream of, and no heartaches, no problems, no challenges, no difficulties whatsoever. It wouldn't compare with the delight of a shah achas. That means 1 hour or 1 moment in the lowest level of Gan Eden. So if you have a tzaddik she'eina gomer, a tzaddik who is imperfect, and he needs a little bit of atonement for that imperfection, so because Hashem loves tzaddikim, He gives them a rough ride in Olam Hazeh, this world, with its small time stuff, in order they should be able to have the Olam Haba in its entirety. That's the simple understanding of the Gemara. What the Gemara says: tzaddik b'tevlei, tzaddik gomer, tzaddik b'ralei, tzaddik she'eina gomer. And the same is true. The Rasha b'ralei is completely wicked. Therefore, he suffers both in this world and the world to come. While the Rasha b'tevlei is not completely wicked, and therefore he gets good in this world, and he atones for his wickedness in the world to come. That's the simple meaning. But from the fact that the Gemara says tzaddik b'tevlei, tzaddik gomer, tzaddik b'ralei, tzaddik she'eina gomer, shows us that tzaddik b'tevlei and tzaddik b'ralei are two levels. They're not just two situations. They're two levels. There's a tzaddik gomer and tzaddik she'eina gomer, and that implies that the Rasha b'tevlei and the Rasha b'ralei are also two levels. So if that's the case, there's a total of 5 levels. There's tzaddik b'tevlei, tzaddik b'ralei, Rasha b'tevlei, Rasha b'ralei, and Beinani. The Parsha Mishpatim Pirush in the Zohar section of the Zohar is attributed to Moshe Rabbeinu, the trusted shepherd, or the faithful shepherd. Parsha Mishpatim, it explains tzaddik v'raloi, and what's the meaning of the word tzaddik v'raloi? Sheharasha boi kafuf l'toi v'chul. V'raloi, there is a little bit of ra there, there's a little bit of bad there, but the ra is loi. It's completely subordinated to the true him, which is his good. So there's a little bit of bad, but the bad is subordinated to the good. So what's the advantage of the quote from the Zohar from the Raya Mehemda? We said before that even in the Gemara, it's clear that Rasha v'tevlei, Rasha v'ralei are two different levels. But this one is a tzaddik v'tevlei, tzaddik v'ralei are two different levels. This is the tzaddik gomer, the tzaddik she'eina gomer. But the words tevlei and ralei, the way we understand them in the Gemara, don't describe the level. They describe the person's life. However, the Zohar takes it a step further and says the word the raloi also describes his level. He's a tzaddik, which means he's primarily righteous. But there's a little bit of ra there, and that little bit of ra is loy. It's to him. It's completely subordinated to the him, which is the tzaddik within him. So the little bit of evil that there is completely subordinated and nullified to the good. And therefore we understand that Rasha v'tevlei, Rasha v'ralei would mean the same. And Rasha v'tevlei means the Rasha who has a little bit of good in him, but that little bit of good is subordinated to the bad. And Rasha v'ralei is a Rasha who's completely. So not only are there 5 levels, but the words tzaddik v'tevlei, tzaddik v'ralei, Rasha v'tevlei, Rasha v'ralei actually describe the level. Now, the Gemara, towards the end of the 9th chapter of Brachas, the Gemara says a statement which could be used for us to help get a better understanding of what exactly is a tzaddik, what exactly is a rasha, and what exactly is a beinani. So the Gemara says, tzaddikim yetzer tov sheif torchulu. That a tzaddik is judged by his yetzer tov, or shall we say, advised by his yetzer tov. Rishoyim yetzer hara sheiftan. In the case of a rasha, the yetzer hara advises him. Beinanim zeh v'zeh sheiftan l'chudu. And in the case of the beinani, both of them advise him, the yetzer tov and the yetzer hara. That's a statement in the Gemara in Brachas, which is followed by the following statement, which is extremely peculiar. Amar Rabbi said, Rabbi was one of the greatest sages of the Talmud. He said to his students, teaching them this concept, this subject of tzaddik, rasha, beinani. And when you give an example, it's much easier to understand. Right? When something is abstract, it's hard to understand. When you give a tangible example, much easier to understand. So Rabbi is teaching his students the concept of tzaddik, rasha, beinani, said to them, Kigoyin ana beinani. You want to get a better understanding of a beinani? Look at me. I'm an example of a beinani, Rabbi said to his students. I'm an intermediate, in betweener, right in the middle. Amar le Abaye, so his student Abaye objected. And he said, you're not letting anyone live. If you're a beinani, what chance do we have? And there's 2 interpretations in the words, you're not leaving life for anyone. One interpretation is, if you're a beinani, then compared to you, we're all Rishoyim. And the Rishoyim, our sages say, a rasha during his lifetime is called dead. So if you are a Beinoni that makes us all Rishoyim, then we're all dead. So you're not allowing anyone life. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation is, it says, Tzaddik Yisoid Olam. There's a Tzaddik is the foundation of the world. The world survives and lives in the merit of a Tzaddik. You are the Tzaddik Hadar. You, Rabbi, are the Tzaddik of the generation. So if you're a Beinoni, that means there's no Tzaddik. If there's no Tzaddik, then we don't have the right to live. Because the world lives in the merit of the Tzaddik. So he objects to Rabbi describing himself as a Beinoni because if you're a Tzaddik, then you're not allowing anyone to live. If you're a Beinoni, you must be a Tzaddik. In any case, what we see from here is that even though Rabbi's claim to be a Beinoni was very strongly rejected, but Rabbi said, I am a Beinoni. Rabbi wasn't lying. He wasn't playing humility games. He obviously had reason to identify himself as a Beinoni. So what does that tell us about what a Beinoni means? So our idea of what a Beinoni means should be shaped by the fact that Rabbi suspected himself of being a Beinoni, even if he was wrong. Now, you can only make a wrong statement about something that has some comparability, some similarity. So that will help us understand what a Beinoni is. To understand all this with a clear explanation. We also are troubled and find difficult a statement in Gemara in Baba Basra, the first chapter, where the Gemara quotes Job, who said, Rebbeinu Shalom, master of the world, Barasa tzadikim, Barasa Rishoyim. He said, it's not fair. You created the righteous, and you created the wicked. So the simple understanding of it is, Eve saying to Hashem, well, how can you punish the righteous for being, how could you reward the righteous for being righteous and punish the wicked for being wicked? You're the creator. You made the righteous righteous, and you made the wicked wicked. Now, if that's the meaning of what Eve is saying, that's very problematic. Why? Well, tzaddik v'rasha lo ka'amar. The Gemara says that at the time of conception, there's an angel who is responsible to supervise conception, and he pronounces at the time of conception the destiny of the child is being conceived. And he says the full destiny of the child, whether he'll be strong or weak, wise or foolish, rich or poor. All that destiny is proclaimed at the moment of conception. But there's one thing that he doesn't say, and that is righteous or wicked. Why? Because that's up to free choice. That's not decided by any angels, it's not predestined. That's up to your free choice. So how could Eve say, Barasa tzadikim, Barasa Rishoyim, you Hashem created the righteous, you Hashem created the wicked. Hashem didn't create righteous or wicked. Hashem created every person with free choice, and we make a choice. We'll do the right thing or do the wrong thing. So how do these two things fit together? Now, there are some Mefarshim who say that Eve was wrong. Eve said, Barasa tzadikim, Barasa Rishoyim, but that's not true. Hashem didn't create righteous and wicked. He created people with free choice. For some reason, the Alter Rebbe doesn't follow that interpretation that Eve was wrong. He assumes that if the Gemara quotes that Eve said, Barasa tzadikim, Barasa Rishoyim, that's the way it is. You just have to understand what it means. Why does the Alter Rebbe not want to follow the interpretation that Eve was wrong? So one of the answers is because there's a Gemara in Soita where the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan told over that he was inspired by a prayer that he overheard from a young lady. What was her prayer? Her prayer was, she said, Rebbeinu Shalom, Barasa tzadikim, Barasa Rishoyim. You created the righteous, you created the wicked. I have one request from you. I don't want to be the cause of anyone's sinfulness. I know there's going to be righteous people in the world. I know there's going to be wicked people in the world, but I don't want to be the cause of anyone's wickedness. And I'm asking you that favor, that I shouldn't be the cause of someone's sin. Yeah. And Rabbi Yochanan was inspired by that prayer that he overheard. So since Rabbi Yochanan praised this young lady for her prayer, obviously her words were true. So she said the same words that Eve said, Barasa tzadikim, Barasa Rishoyim. So you can't say that Eve's words are apocryphal. If Rabbi Yochanan praised someone who used the same words, so obviously you have to say that it's true that there's free choice, and it's true that people are not predestined to do the right thing or to do the wrong thing. And nevertheless, there is a concept of Barasa tzadikim, Barasa Rishoyim. Hashem created righteous and Hashem created wicked. We just have to understand, what does it mean? What does it mean that Hashem created the righteous and Hashem created the wicked? Which we're going to get the explanation for later in time. Gam lahavin, we also need to understand mahus madregas habeinin. We have to understand the essence of this level of beinin. The simple answer, if you ask anybody, what's a beinin? Tell you, a tzaddik is a person who only does mitzvahs. And Rasha is a person who does avedus. And a beinin is 50-50. So the Alter Rebbe says, it can't mean 50-50. Why can't it mean 50-50? She'im kain, because if it means 50-50, 50% mitzvahs and 50% avedus, how would the Rabbi have mistaken himself to be a beinin? Even if Rabbi was wrong to say that he's a beinin. But he obviously had to, it could only be something within the reach that that could have mistaken himself to be. The Gemara tells a story that there's a disagreement in heaven, the heavenly academy, between the Almighty and the heavenly academy, and the law associated with tsaras, with the impurity coming from leprosy. And there's a din that the Torah says that if in the white blotch there's 2 white hairs, that's proof that it's proper tzaras and the person is pummel. So the halacha is that there has to be that first of the blotch is there, and then the white hairs grow into the blotch. But if the white hairs are there first, and then the white blotch shows up around it, that's not pummel. So the Gemara says, well, what about if it's doubtful which one came first? You see, suddenly there's a white blotch with 2 hairs. We don't know which one came first. So there's a machlekes between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Mesifta Derekiyah. The Academy of Heaven says one way, and the Almighty says the opposite. Machlekes. So the Gemara says there was a machlekes between the Almighty and Mesifta Derekiyah. So they said, who's going to rule? Yeah, it's a tough one. Who rules? So they said that Rabbi Bar Nachmani, that's our Rabbi, is an expert in the laws of Negorim. So let's get Rabbi Bar Nachmani to rule. What do you do? Rabbi Bar Nachmani is in the physical world, and the machlekes is taking place in the heavenly academy. So they sent the angel of death to summon Rabbi Bar Nachmani, be brought before the heavenly academy to give his ruling. So the angel of death had a problem. Why do you have a problem? Because in his contract, it's one of the rules that he has to abide by is that when someone is studying Torah, you can't disturb him. And the Rabbi never stopped studying Torah. His mouth never stopped speaking words of Torah. So he was not able to fulfill his mission to summon the Rabbi. And the Gemara goes on to say how he managed to pull it off. But we see that Rabbi wasn't just a fine man. Rabbi was so dedicated to Torah study that he never stopped for a second. And according to a further interpretation, if the angel of death couldn't approach him, we know the Gemara says that the Yetzer Hara and the Satan and the angel of death are all one. First, the Yetzer Hara comes and convinces the person to sin. Then he runs up to heaven and slanders the person, and then he is appointed as the agent to execute the punishment. So if the angel of death couldn't approach him, that means the Yetzer Hara also couldn't approach him. So then surely he didn't have 50% sins. Surely nowhere near there. So how could the Rabbi have said, for example, I am a Beinoni? Even if he was wrong to make that conclusion. But the fact that he even considered that as a possibility shows that Beinoni is not what we think it is.
Maybe Benjamin is not what he thinks it is.
Rabbi was a quite learned man. So he probably knew what a Beinoni is. The question is if he knew what he is.
I meant on his level. Sorry, that sounded really bad.
But a Beinoni doesn't mean on his level. A Beinoni is a Beinoni. So we have to know what is the definition of a tzaddik, what's the definition of a rasha, what's the definition of a Beinoni. Okay, we're running out of time. So we'll keep everybody in suspense. And I just wanted to check, are we okay with the shiur next week? It's the day before Tanya fasting. Okay, I will have to prepare the shafman and see either before or after. As Mr. Shem.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.